Hey everybody, I'm here today with Linds Brown, and she is from Minnesota. She's also an ocular melanoma patient, and we've actually heard from her before, and she talked a little about enucleation, but we brought her back today because she is this incredible speaker, and I don't know if you guys have seen her online, but she posts about her speaking engagements and things like that, and so we're going to cover a little bit of that, but like Lindsay, I'm just so glad you're here with us today.
Thank
And
you. Thank you. Yes,
we're
I'm
here
glad to be
today,
here.
right? And we're going to be here tomorrow. And we're just trusting that those tomorrows add up. If you guys have seen
Absolutely.
any of my posts, I know that time and like all of that, the preciousness of being present, especially when you're dealing with metastatic disease, is it's a lot to kind of wrap your head around sometimes, especially for those of us in the younger OM community. So,
hmm
Linz, thanks for being here.
You're so welcome. Yeah, and Danae, you're right. The concept of time is one of those tricky concepts where, all of a sudden when you're faced with a diagnosis like ocular melanoma, like we're faced with, time all of a sudden becomes front and center, so important. Like we don't want to waste it. We don't want to spoil it. We want to, cherish it as much as we can. And there's so much pressure, I think, in the cancer community to stay present and meditate so you can stay present and be in the moment. And I think that's just added pressure to all the other pressures that
Yeah.
we face in this community. But I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about the keynote that I developed about the concept of time. It's less of like cherish every moment and stay present. It's less of a sort of like a hippy dippy, like, oh, you got this type of presentation. It's more talking about time in a way that allows it to be on our side, that allows it to, or allows ourselves to really see it as something that's working for us and not against us. And so I've actually been speaking in the healthcare space for about 12 years. And when this diagnosis came about, I had wanted to transition to an actual, a keynote speaker, someone who went around to different conferences and spoke on a motivational level. You've been to a conference today where you've had an opening speaker that sort of sets the tone, and or a
Yeah.
closing speaker that like sends you off back into the world after this sort of container is
Hmm.
done, with some sort of inspirational momentum. And so I have always wanted to be that. And when ocular melanoma came into my life, I thought, you know what? No time like the present. Speaking of time, no time like the present
Yeah.
to develop a talk about something motivational. I didn't know at the time that I had the urge to become a keynote speaker what I wanted to talk about. But this concept of time just kept coming up in really cool ways. And in thinking about how we approach time, a lot of times we villainize time in just the language that we use. We say things like we spend time and we kill time and we waste time. And we use these negative terms when we talk about time as though it's not something that's this renewable gift that shows up every single morning. And Danae, I love your saying, like, I'll be here today, I'll be here tomorrow, and tomorrow's add up. Like, that's viewing time as the precious gift that it actually is and the renewable resource that it actually is. It's not something that's fleeting. It's not something that we don't have enough of. Those are excuses that we use a lot. But part of what I try to instill in the audiences that I communicate to is that time in its preciousness and in its renewability is working for us. We just have to see it that way. Um, and so, I start off my talk from a very early age. I grew up on a farm. I don't know if you have a lot of experience growing up on
Well,
a
I mean,
farm, but
I guess Minnesota, Midwest, like that
Minnesota,
probably
Midwest. Yep,
probably makes sense.
exactly. Yep, yep, yep. So I grew up on a Midwest farm, and it was actually in Wisconsin. But I learned from a really early age that farmers are this group of people, this group of professionals that think they know the best time for everything because they kind of have to, right? They have to know the best time to plant crops, the best time to harvest crops. They have to
Hmm.
understand like the arc of the sun and what that means for weed growth and things of that nature. And so I learned really early on that my dad, being the farmer that he was, thought he knew the best time for everything. And it played out in a really interesting way. Every time I get together with my siblings, this story comes up. um, we were all charged with helping my parents get the cattle in the barn. And my siblings, or my two brothers and I, formed this semicircle with my parents around the cattle that we were trying to get in. And my dad looked at my little sister, who was 5 at the time, about, and told her, he said, Paige, go stand in the doorway of the barn and you be the bait. And so, yeah, exactly. You
I'm
have
just
small
like,
kids.
I'm picturing
I
my
have small
5-year-old, and
kids.
I'm like, are we sure?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, but my dad thought, okay, since he knows the best time for everything, he thought that he knew the right time to tell her to move so that when the cattle got close enough, she wouldn't get trampled. And so here we were chasing these cattle toward the entryway of the barn, toward my little sister. And my dad would yell out, "Okay, Paige, move!" And she would leap to the corner of the barn, and the cattle would run through. And spoiler alert, she lived to tell the tale, which I honestly don't know how to this day. I'm not sure how. But it's so funny because every time that story comes up for us, anytime I'm with my brothers and my sisters there, it will come up because they're like, "Oh, Paige, remember when you used to be the bait? Remember when you used to be the bait?" But it got me thinking about like knowing the best time for everything. Because what if my sister hadn't been there? What if she hadn't been in the entryway and the cattle just saw that doorway as like their path to freedom and they would have run right through anyway? Like, was that necessary to even have her there? And it got me thinking, 20, 30 years later about this concept of thinking we know the right time for everything. And what if we're limiting our opportunities by thinking we know the right time for everything?
Yeah. Like
Um,
almost like by trying to plan it and
Yeah.
make it,
Yep.
kind of structure it, structure life, structure our plan for
Mhm.
life, like whatever. Like if we're trying to structure it too much, that it almost takes away from really just the experience that it can be to live your
Yeah,
life.
exactly. And how many times have you been offered an opportunity and you said to yourself, "Oh, I don't have time for this," or "It's not the right time,"
Hmm.
as though we have complete control and we know the best timing for everything. But Danae, you're going to love this because something that I bring up is the book A Court of Thorns and Roses. Because in the fifth book, we've talked a lot about
Yes,
how
we love.
our reading interests are very similar. But there's this one phrase or sentence that Amryn says in the fifth book, where she's talking to Rhysand, and she said, "The cauldron will only extend its benevolence for so long before offering it to someone else."
Mm.
And you can insert, if you're not familiar with the word cauldron, no problem. You're probably just not a fantasy romantasy reader. But you could insert the word universe, you could insert the word God, you could insert, any source of life and power and peace into that phrase and say the universe will only extend its benevolence for so long before offering it to someone else. So if these opportunities are tapping you on the shoulder, if you say it's not the right time right now, maybe they'll come back around again, but maybe they won't. Maybe denying that opportunity a couple of times means that, there will be a shift and that opportunity will be given to someone else. And so I just think that's a fascinating concept to consider because a lot of times we use time as an excuse to not do the things that we want to do, an excuse to not say yes to opportunities that are going to challenge us, an excuse to not spend time or share time with the people that mean the most to us, an excuse
Mhm.
not to see the places of the world that we want to see. Like time is always that excuse. And so I just want to invite people to look at it a little bit differently and consider the opportunity that exists in acknowledging that maybe you don't know the best time for everything. Maybe something comes up at the exact right moment, regardless of everything else that's happening in your life.
Yeah.
And you just have to have the courage and the bravery to say, "Okay, I'm going to see where this takes me."
Yeah, like
Um,
I mean, I guess I kind of think of it a little bit like just trusting that I mean, I use the analogy Gus,
yeah,
God,
yeah.
universe, source,
Hmm.
but it's just kind of trusting the idea that the universe or God or whatever it is that you believe in is going to put things in your path, for a reason. And I think that, we have to be careful with that because I think it can be really exceptionally invalidating to cancer communities and to us as cancer patients to be like, oh, like this diagnosis happened to you like for a reason. Like
Hmm.
sometimes framing it that way I don't think can be as helpful. um but also like the people that we meet, like the people we meet along the way during this journey, like those
Exactly.
people come into our path like for a reason. And to just trust that, you know, those opportunities that come up, those challenging kind of moments for growth, or in my history of like dealing with my own diagnosis, just some of the types of treatments or the things that I've pursued, you know, in my efforts to navigate metastatic disease, like histotripsy or using
Hmm.
sound healing. Most recently, like I tried a little bit of hypnotherapy, like just different things that are helping me to navigate this as a person.
Hmm.
And just trusting that, like, if they're coming up and that if I'm noticing or talking to someone, like, that it's there for a reason. And that
Right.
maybe instead of ignoring it, I should listen to it. I should just tap
Yeah.
into it a little bit.
Right. You bring up a great point. It's one of those things where I learned this lesson, I guess, the first time I ever did an ice bath. It was
I don't do
a couple
baths,
years
but I
ago.
understand the cold concept. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So the first time I ever submerged myself in a vat of ice, it was actually in a big Yeti cooler, and there were probably 5 or 6 coolers lined up at this place here in Minneapolis. And I think the woman next to me in the cooler next to me must have sensed the fear that was sort of emanating off of my being as I was preparing to, get in this giant bucket of ice. And she looked at me and she said, just use your breath. Your breath is your best resource. You look terrified, and all fear is telling you is that you're forgetting every available resource. She said, use your breath. Your breath is your best resource in this moment. So when you get in, keep your breath cyclical. Inhales, count of six, outhales. I always say outhales, exhales for the count of six. And the moment I got in that ice, in my brain, I was like, wow, it's a good thing I'm in a vat of ice because this is how I die. I'm not going to freeze to death, and they can just close the lid and store me for later. Like this is it for me. But then she looked at me. She said, remember to breathe. Like just remember your breath. That's your best resource. And so I did. And I through the shaking, right, I remembered to inhale and exhale in a cyclical way. And I made it 3 minutes that first time in an ice bath. And it got me thinking about, those feelings that come up, those big, sometimes scary feelings that come up, and how a lot of times we can allow those feelings to paint our reality and become
Mhm.
fact. And one of the things that the whole ice bath thing taught me, and the beautiful acronym that she gave me about fear, was that feelings aren't fact, they're data. And when we have those big, intense feelings, instead of allowing them to paint our reality, like because I'm afraid, it means something scary is going to happen, or because I'm sad, it means something tragic is going to happen. Like instead of allowing those feelings to just like almost a self-fulfilling prophecy paint our reality, understanding that those feelings are just data, and that data is telling us that we need to find a new coping mechanism, or employ a different resource, or reach out to a different practitioner, or find a different expert in the field, or phone a friend, or take a nap, or eat a snack. All that data that your being and your system is getting from those feelings aren't meant to stay. They're not meant to be, like, hi, anger, I'm going to build a house for you so that you can just be here forever. Like, that's not what those feelings are meant to do. They're not meant to stay. They're meant to give you feedback, give you data, and then move through. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned, especially in the midst of a scary cancer diagnosis. Like, feelings feel too big
Mhm.
when big life things happen. Like feelings feel unmanageable, and they feel uncontrollable. They feel chaotic. And
Yeah.
so putting a not a cage around them, but putting them in a category that says, okay, this is data. This is telling me something.
Well, it's so interesting to hear you talk about this because just kind of for reference,
Yeah.
I have been chatting with Linz like over the last week and a half, ever since finding out that I have yet another recurrence in my liver. And
Hmm.
this is something that, you know, I guess a lot of us in the metastatic community, like we don't get a whole lot of breaks, right? It's pretty typical to like not have a whole lot of no change. I was one of those people who had a really long period of time of no change, like an unheard of amount of time between one lesion found, and then nothing for almost 18 months. And
Hmm.
that was, in some ways, I think it kind of, I don't want to say it robbed me of anything, but I felt unprepared for the kind of the level of fear that comes up every single time you have a scan, after you have, a recurrence, or after you have more cancer that is, prevalent in your liver. And this most recent time has probably felt the most scary. And
Hmm.
it's just kind of interesting because logically I can work myself through it, right? But the
Right.
feelings are still there.
Hmm.
And somewhere along the way, I had kind of decided that there was, like, that somehow more made it so that I couldn't manage this. And it's kind of one of those things, like you talked about, believing, like when you believe something, it becomes your reality. That kind of belief that, like, oh my gosh, if I get to this point, like, then that's just going to be too much for me to handle. Well, if you
Hmm.
keep programming that, like, then your subconscious and your emotions and like all of it is going to follow that thought. There's a life coach that I loved listening to years ago, Brooke Castillo. She's like the life coach
Hmm.
school. And she talks about how our thoughts actually come before the emotion. Like, and so when we have a thought of like, oh my gosh, it's going to be so hard, then that creates the emotion of defeat or hopelessness, or, whatever the
Hmm.
feeling is. And then we can sometimes get stuck in the feeling, and the feeling becomes this ingrained belief, and then
Right.
the cycle continues. And so that's why reframing can be so powerful, right? In therapy, like when you can reframe the story and just kind of retell the story a little bit. Linz and I were talking this week, and it's been kind of just a little bit, almost a little bit shocking to like see the difference from even a week ago to now. But in retrospect, like, I did just what you were talking about. Like, I actually I actually put that subconsciously into practice. Like, just the idea that I kind of had told myself that it was going to be too hard and that those feelings were too big, and it
Hmm.
did feel like that initially.
Yeah.
But then, the more that I kind of sat with that and really got, I guess it's really more like a curiosity feeling, right? It's like, okay, why is
Right.
this coming up? And the more that I sat with that whole why is this coming up, the more the feelings shifted from the panic, like, to, okay, like, I have this information on my scans, right? But I am here today. I can remind myself of the present, but also, I'm still feeling really, really afraid. So, like, why is that?
Yeah.
And instead of getting stuck in the I just am here and I feel this, it became why do I feel this, and evolved into, over the course of a few different professionals kind of talking to me and talking through things, I'm like, I think I have really severe hospital PTSD. And
Mm.
so then once I landed on that information, it was like, okay, well, that's something that I can solve. Like, I can work through that in, like you said, with a different modality of therapy, or I can try a different approach. And so then it's not that the news that I got a week and a half ago is somehow easier to bear. It's just that I used the information, and now I have something to work towards that
Yeah.
is, helpful, instead of feeling like I'm just stuck in this like waiting place. Like, I have
Right.
something to focus on.
Yeah, which is amazing. And good on you for putting into practice that, understanding that your feelings are data and they're telling you that you're clearly in need of additional resources. You're in need of additional insight or additional feedback, or another person on your care team to just talk you through options. Like, that's
Yeah.
what feelings are supposed to do. And I feel like, and I'm not saying by any means that those big feelings should just be ignored. Like, let
No.
yourself be mad, let yourself be sad, let yourself, you know, be whatever you feel, but then understand that you can't stay there.
Yeah. You
You
can't
can't
unpack
just,
and live
you
there.
can't, right, exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So that's incredible. And I just want to acknowledge what a crazy week you've had.
Yeah. So it's a lot of grappling with lost expectations. But I think that
Yeah,
the, maybe not ironic, but just the telling part of it is that that's what we do this whole diagnosis, is we grapple
right.
with lost expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though, maybe the expectations that you have are changing, or that, whatever is feeling like a letdown, or feeling like,
Yeah.
so devastating or really scary feeling, it's not necessarily that you haven't processed something like this before, right? Like, you guys,
Mm-hmm.
like, we go
Right.
through these patterns. We go through periods of anxiety with scans, whether
Right.
something is found or not. You go through it either way.
Yeah,
Like, so
exactly.
you have the capacity to do it. You've proven to yourself that you can do it over and over and over again. That doesn't
Yeah.
make it easy. That
It
doesn't
doesn't
make
make it
it
easy.
doesn't
Yeah,
make it enjoyable.
and you know what's really interesting is there's not even a way to compare.
No.
You know what I mean? Because I think about, like, when cancer in my body metastasized to my liver, it exploded with 20 plus little tumors off the bat. And that was, 18 months after my diagnosis. Last night I was laying in bed thinking, like, would it be easier if I would have had more time between, like, or if just one or two tumors would have showed up and I could treat those and then got a break
Hmm.
before the next wave. Like, none of it is easier. There's no way to compare because it's all just like there's no rhyme or reason. There's
Yeah.
no telling like
And the
how
lack of
one person's going to.
control.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
exactly.
all of it,
Exactly.
it doesn't matter if you have one tumor or 20
It
or
doesn't.
100.
No,
Like
that's
the
the
level
thing. Like,
of uncontrollableness and the uncertainty, the fear that
yep,
comes up, it's maybe varying degrees, but I
right.
honestly, I don't even think it's that though, because I feel like
Yeah,
every single time, even when I've had just one tumor, like the same types of fears have come up and
exactly.
surfaced.
Yeah, that's my point. Like, I think I still would have had just as strong of a reaction to
Hmm.
one as I did with the 20 plus or whatever they said at the beginning.
Yeah.
I think that there's comfort in knowing that I'm not alone in facing those harsh realities and
Yeah.
those scanxiety phases and things of that nature. Like, we're all doing that. We're all facing our own very similar feelings when it comes to those things.
Yeah.
Castle Biosciences is a proud sponsor of this I Believe podcast. Castle's innovative uveal melanoma tests provide valuable information about the risk of your eye cancer spreading to help you and your healthcare team individualize the management of your disease. To learn more, visit castlebiosciences.com.
I'm a doula on the side. It's not my full-time gig, but I support mamas who are bringing babies into the world. And there was this one birth that I supported that was an accidental home birth. And I say that doulas are not supposed to actually help deliver babies. They're supposed to provide the parents with emotional and physical support. We're non-medical support. So actually delivering a baby is very far outside the scope of what a doula is supposed to do. But there was one birth where I got a phone call in the middle of the night by the mom. And she said, okay, I think we're getting ready to go to the birth center. We'd love for you to join us now. And I was like, okay, I'll be right over. And I drove from my house to her house, which was about a 20-minute drive. And I let myself in the front door. Her older daughter was still asleep, and her parents were there to care for the older daughter. And they're like, oh, she's upstairs. So I let myself upstairs into the master suite. And she was in the bathroom with her partner. And I walked in. I was like, hey, how you doing? And she looked up at me with panicked eyes and she said, I think I waited too long. And I was like, oh, let's get you out the door. Let's get you to the car. The birth center was like a mile and a half down the road. So it's like, okay,
Oh
let's
my
get going.
goodness. Yeah,
I
like
looked
not
at her
far.
husband and I was like, we gotta go. Like I'm trying to relay the sense of urgency to him and try to kind of protect her in her little birthing labory cocoon over here. And so we help her down the stairs. We help her out the front door and we get to the passenger side of the car and she looks at us and she's like, no, 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 baby's coming, baby's coming. And I was like, okay, let's get back in the house. And so we go in and I say, okay, let's go in the living room. She said, no, 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 I just got new carpet. We can't go in the living room. And I was like, I don't think I was ever that in tune with like my surroundings to be like, no, we can't go in there because I just got new carpet. I thought that was just such
No,
a funny
I would
thing.
have not been present with that
Same.
information.
No, no, no. Same. Yeah. Like my son was born in the front seat of my car and I
Oh
sort of
man.
realized it after the fact. Like I just was not in it. But we sat down right in the front foyer of her house. I remember it was like black and white checkered floor. I'll never forget it. And she delivered her baby into my arms in that moment on their floor. And I asked her parents to get some blankets and towels and things like that. I called 911 so they could talk me through like baby care and make sure everything was okay.
Yeah.
And they came really quick. The ambulance came super quick. And so when we got to the hospital, one of the nursing staff came in the room who hadn't been in there yet. And she goes, oh, you must be their doula. How long have you been a doula? And I looked at her and I was like, well, normally I would answer this question by saying 5 years. But today I'm going to answer this question by saying long enough to know what to do during an accidental home birth. And she was like, what happened? So I got to kind of explain the whole story to her. And like I left that, I remember it was Easter morning. when this happened a couple years ago. And I remember driving home at like 7 a.m., just in time to see my kids find their Easter baskets and, all that good stuff. I remember driving home thinking, man, how much, how many times are we asked how long we've been doing something? Like how long have you been the Akira Insight podcast host?
I mean, I'm pretty sure it's been 4 years.
Okay, okay.
Like maybe
See,
pretty, yeah, about
yeah,
4 years. But like,
yeah,
but also, I could choose to answer it differently. It could just be, well,
exactly.
long enough to
That's my
know that
point.
I'm
Yep.
pretty good at what I do.
Exactly. Yeah. So how often do we get asked, like, how long have you been doing something? And we automatically go to the number of years. Like we automatically
Hmm.
focus on the start and the stop
Yeah.
of whatever it is we're doing. And we pay no attention, and we don't like pay any like heed to the nuanced like lessons that have been learned in however long we've been doing it. And I don't know about you, but whenever I ask that question and someone says a year, I'm like, okay, cool. And then I move on. Right. But in this instance, when this nurse heard my response, she was like, oh my gosh, what happened? Like she leaned in for more information. And it got me thinking about the human connection, like how cool it would be if we really like paid attention to either how many people we've impacted or the lessons that we've learned in the time that we've shared with doing one particular thing, and actually communicated that to the people around us. Like how many conversations that would open up. And maybe we're not interested in further conversations. So I say 5 years and then I move on with my life, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's so interesting when you think about it, like especially when I talk to people who are teachers or people who work in the healthcare field, like how many lives they've impacted, how many kids they've had a chance to teach. Like those are the things that I think make the human experience so rich and so nuanced. And I think that as humans, we can just do a better job communicating that and celebrating that in each other. So I've constantly tried to figure out different ways of like explaining how I've shared my time and what that has done for either the people around me or the people I've spoken to or things of that nature. So I encourage you, if you want a fun exercise, like try to come up with a couple drafts of different answers to that question.
Oh, I think that's so powerful. And that could even be applied to, for those of us listening, I think most of you guys are probably ocular melanoma patients. If you're not an ocular melanoma patient, then you're probably a caregiver of someone with ocular melanoma, or potentially even a doctor. Like instead of saying like, oh, I've been a doctor for, or I've been a patient with OM for 10 years, because I think
Yeah,
that I don't know. I guess what I feel like you're kind of getting at here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just this idea that if we limit ourselves to just the start and the stop, right? Of, oh, I was
hmm,
diagnosed 4.5 years ago. Like if we limit ourselves and our experience and the time that has been spent in navigating this to just the bare bones of, oh well, it's been this long,
yeah,
then it can almost kind of like dampen it down to, or like, because if you hear someone say, oh, I've been dealing with ocular melanoma, or I'm a survivor of 20 years,
hmm,
like that sounds incredible. And
right,
at least to most of us, dealing with this diagnosis earlier on, that sounds
yeah.
absolutely insane in some
Sounds
ways.
magical. It sounds like
Magical, yeah, like it sounds like a
everything.
miracle.
Yes, it
But then if you hear
does.
someone
Yeah.
say like, oh yeah, like I've been a patient for 3 years, or I'm 5 years into my diagnosis, like
Yeah.
there's almost kind of like judgments that we make subconsciously as a patient community about
Right.
about each other and about ourselves, saying like, oh well, it's only been, like it's only been a
Right.
year, or it's
Yeah.
only been 5 years, versus someone who's been maybe dealing with this for 10 years. um but the
Yeah. Isn't that
reality
funny?
is, like, we can't dumb it down, like, to just
Right.
like, oh, it's only been this
Well,
amount of
and
time.
exactly. Like, and the thing about it is like, and I've come up with my own draft answers to the question of how long have you been living with cancer? And I always start by saying, well, I was diagnosed in 2022, but I've been living through this long enough to have developed a whole keynote about the preciousness of time and make three of my best friends from across the country because of this diagnosis. Like I think it's a self-preservation technique as well
Mhm.
as a human connection technique to be able to acknowledge not just the length of time. I think length is important, especially when you're
Yeah.
talking about a diagnosis, because you're right. When I hear that someone has been living with cancer for 20 years, I'm like, holy crap, I could be a unicorn too. You know what I mean?
Yes, I
That could be me.
volunteer.
Exactly, exactly. But regardless, like one of the crazy things about this diagnosis is that like it's kind of, do your kids like the claw machine
Oh
in
my
the
gosh.
arcade?
Yes,
Okay,
all the
mine
time.
too. We've got so much crap in our house because of those claw machines. But I feel like cancer was that moment. Like it was that claw machine moment. Like the diagnosis was that moment that sort of ripped me up out of my daily reality,
Hmm.
right? And it ripped me up, and it forced perspective. It forced me to take a look at how I was sharing my time, what I was spending my energy on, like what I was focused on, and what I learned in that moment when it was like, look, like I'm lifting you up here. I'm taking you out of your daily reality. I'm going to scare the crap out of you, but I want you to actually look at what you're doing with your life. And I realized after doing a ton of reflection and after that moment that I was giving so much energy to the things that did not matter the most. And I think that's the beautiful thing about, if I have to say that anything about this diagnosis is beautiful, I would just say that the opportunity for that forced perspective for me is where the beauty lies. Because that forced perspective has shown me that I used to pay a lot of attention to things that did not matter. I used to let work situations that were not life and death ruin my week. I used to let an argument with a friend completely ruin my day instead of just being like, you know what, we're both human. We're both trying to do this thing. It's hard. And so I think that there's so much power in that perspective that claw machine moment grants you when you have a crazy life experience like a cancer diagnosis. Just kind of flip everything on its head.
Aura Biosciences is a clinical stage biotechnology company focused on developing precision therapies for solid tumors that aim to preserve organ function. Our lead candidate, Belsar, is currently in late stage development for primary choroidal melanoma and in early stage development in other ocular oncology indications and bladder cancer. Our mission is to grow as an innovative global oncology company that positively transforms the lives of patients. For more information, please visit us at aurabiosciences.com.
You don't have any choice but to take a look at how you're living your life and how you're sharing your time. And you kind of do that values analysis and say, well, these are the things I value most, but they don't line up with how I'm sharing my time during my day. I heard someone say, how you spend your day is how you spend your week, is how you spend your month, is how you spend your life. And I thought that was so powerful because in that moment where I was, given that perspective, that gift of perspective, I was not living my life in a way that was reflective of my true values. And a lot has shifted since then because of it. And there is beauty there.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to recognize too that, as we have this realization, because I think all of us come to this point where we see, oh wow, like this makes you look at life differently, right? When you get your
Hmm.
diagnosis, or if you get a metastatic diagnosis at any point in your ocular melanoma journey, it forces you to look at life differently. But the difference is that you really, it's almost like a crossroads. Like you have the
Hmm.
moment when the claw machine, and you guys know how the claw machines work. Like, did you ever actually get anything from the claw machine? Like,
Rarely.
no. So then it's even better, right? Because ocular melanoma is like 6 in a million chance of being diagnosed. So then like the
Yeah.
claw machine catching onto it and holding it is like, it never happens.
Right. Yeah.
So
We're the
we
lucky
have a
ones.
choice though. We have a moment where we can either move it over, right? And it can drop
Hmm.
into the little enclosure. We can take it and we can work with it. We can reflect, we can change,
Hmm.
we can really observe what's happening and decide is this going to be something I allow to change me I like to change me for the better, right?
Hmm.
Because none of us are the same person that we
Right.
were when we were first diagnosed. We are all
Hmm.
different. We value different things. We have shifted, a lot of the things that we do in our lives. Something has changed, but that crossroads is the point where you get to decide: are you going to do something and realign, with your values and make the most of your time, like Linz is saying, or are you going to fall into the pattern of I'm a victim and I'm so scared, I have no control? Because if we stay in those places, like, it's a very different experience, right? to experience cancer through the lens of, okay, like I'm going to make the most of what I have, regardless of what that looks like, regardless of if I have a class 1A tumor that has no chance or very little chance of metastasizing versus a class 2 tumor with the highest chance of metastasizing. Like I'm going to make the most of it. Or that I'm going to, kind of live in this state of fear and scarcity and constantly worry about it. Like it's a very different experience. Not to say that we don't all visit there sometimes,
Right,
because I
exactly.
think
Well,
we
that's
do
the whole
visit.
feelings as data thing, right? Like that's the whole point of understanding that those big feelings will happen and those scary feelings will happen,
Yeah.
but they're telling you something. They're telling you that you have not yet had the conversation you need to have to take the next step. And that's the thing that needs to be sought after.
Yeah.
And that's what that data is telling you. So yeah, time is a funny thing. It's our most renewable resource. Like every single morning, we wake up with a fresh set of time, a fresh bank of time. And in its preciousness, a lot of times we think of it as something that's not on our side, but because of its preciousness, we can kind of reshape how we view it and reshape how we approach it, even reshape how we talk about it to understand that it is on our side, if we choose to believe that. And that's the main message that I try to communicate with audiences, is that time is on your side if you choose to believe it. Yes, it's precious, but it's also renewable. And I think in that renewability, there's so much hope, there's so much opportunity that exists. You just have to see it that way.
Linz, this has been absolutely incredible. I'm so thankful to you for your time today. And
Likewise.
I think that just watching you develop into this keynote speaker over the last few years has been really it's been kind of a gift for me, to be able to see you do this. And it's also been such a huge inspiration to me to choose to say yes to the things that feel like, okay, yeah, I do want to do that. Like instead of saying, no, I don't have time for this, like it's no, I'm gonna do that. Like I'm gonna figure it out because that's important to me. And you
Yeah.
are absolutely like the model of that for me. So
Oh,
I really appreciate
it's
you
amazing.
giving us your time today, the gift of your time. And I hope that those of you guys listening, if you haven't taken a chance to go and listen to any of Lindsay's keynotes, like I would love to make sure that we can link one of those, like where you get to hear her
Yeah.
speak like the whole way through. I know we touched on a lot of the main points that are in your talk, but then like now let's like not spoil the whole surprise and go listen to her speak like in her element, because it is such an experience. And I've just listened online. I haven't been in person. I'm sure those are the people who've been with you in person. It's like a totally different transformative experience. So
Yeah.
anyway, but thank you,
Thank you.
Linz, for being here.
You're welcome. And I'm on Instagram at Linds Speaks, Linds Speaks. So if you want to connect with me on there too, I welcome it.
Awesome. Well, you guys, thanks so much for listening. Thanks for tuning in and for subscribing if you are a subscriber. If you're not, please hit subscribe, and we would love to have you guys back for the next time. And Linz, we will let you get on with the rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon.
Wonderful. Thanks, Danae. Appreciate you.